Mr. Forrest, you've just heard the Treasurer speaking there about the state of play in Australia and these disappointing GDP figures. How are you reading the economic situation there at the moment?
Okay, look, I must say I don't get concerned with short-term fluctuations. I'm a big believer that the trend is your friend. So yes, if you look at the nano time frame, we can be concerned about this. If you look at the broader time frame, I think the trend is your friend, and the Australian economy is going to stay quite strong.
It does seem like with every morning we wake up, there's a new brick in that wall of worry for Australia, including now the outlook for China. Do you think it's necessary for the RBA to cut interest rates? There's a big question about exactly how the Australian economy is going to grow into the future if China's economy continues to cool. Do you think a policy response from the RBA is necessary?
I think it's a really good question. At this stage, no. I think the RBA really watches interest rates, really does watch the Australian economy. The bilateral relationship between Australia and China is as important for the Chinese people as it is for Australia. So I think we need to just stay pretty cool right now. I wouldn't be jumping onto a policy lever immediately. I'd be saying, let's just see how this goes. If the trend starts to trend against us, sure. But at this stage, there are fluctuations, but the trend is okay.
And Matt has a question for you.
Yeah, Mr. Forrest, the China trade war, of course, appears to be nearing a resolution, if you want to believe some of the rhetoric we are hearing out of the United States. But from a global mining perspective, what's been the impact? Because I know I regularly speak to your colleagues and your CEO over at Fortescue Metals, and they've said for a while now that there hasn't been any discernible impact on the business when it comes to this trade war. Is that still the case, or the longer this lingers, is it going to dent confidence as we continue to see these trade tensions continue?
Yeah, Matt, I think I mean, you make a number of really good points and ask a good question. The Chinese economy is robust. Its volumetric growth is actually enormous. Its percentage growth goes up and down by minor amounts. We tend to pick on that isolated number of percentage growth, but actually the Chinese economy is growing in a very robust fashion. The American economy is, of course, very strong. I've spent time with both political leaders. I believe they're both economically responsible. This has come down to sensitivities around business to business as opposed to government. And if we're mindful of that, if we keep business out of some of the sovereign geopolitical issues and say, let's just have business play by the normal rules of the game, then I think we're going to have very strong economies both in China and the United States. And it'll stop debilitating or sending these kind of little fractures which are in the global economy, which really doesn't need the two big gorillas in any kind of argument.
Okay, you mentioned the time that you spent with some political leaders in the United States and China. What about political leaders in Australia? We, of course, have an election coming up there in just a couple of months' time. Do you rate the performance of, I guess, the new Prime Minister, Scott Morrison? What do you think his chances are at the next election? And if we see a change in government, what's your message to the opposition and the opposition leader, Bill Shorten?
Okay, so I don't tend to get drawn into political discussions. I'm an apolitical animal. I'm much more interested in the long-term growth of my country. Politics really does go up and down. With often very little reason. But I would say to both political leaders that there's never been a country nor an economy in the world who's taxed its way to growth. The more taxes you put on an economy, the more you burden it. It can seem like a little bit of sugar. You know, the voters might think, oh, this is great, you know, distribute capital, etc. But it doesn't work like that. If you slow down the economy, you hurt people from the bottom up.
So, Andrew, what do you think are the issues that need to be addressed in this upcoming election? I know you were very vocal in your campaign against the mining tax a couple of years ago. Do you see issues that need to be resolved in order to unlock Australia's economic potential?
Okay, so the problem with the mining tax wasn't the fact that it was taxed, it was the fact that it was dishonest. It actually let off the big companies like mine from paying the tax, and it taxed the little guys. So people say, oh, you're against the mining tax. No. I was against the dishonesty of a rebate coming to my company and the other big companies, but not being available to the smaller companies. I didn't think that was fair. I was a small company with that tax on me. I wouldn't have grown to be a large company. So I'm not against taxes at all to adjust the economic growth, but when you have broad-based tax without a real reason apart from purely to raise general revenue, then I've got a real issue with it, because that slows down the economy. Now, you've seen me speak about a plastic on polymer. Raise the value of plastic, raise the value of the raw material by putting a tax on that. That will adjust behaviour. That will slow down the production of plastic, and that will increase the recyclability and the collectability of plastic. They're good taxes. But let's just raise more revenue taxes. That tends to slow the economy.
Andrew Forrest, unfortunately, we're out of time. We'll have to let you go, but thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
It's been a great pleasure to be on your show. Thank you for having me.